Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and today we are here with this absolutely amazing Renault Alpine A310. What I am particularly interested about with these cars is that on the surface, this is really a French 911. They are both rear-wheel drive, rear-engined, six-cylinder coupes with token rear seats. Yet, the 911 was a phenomenal success. Well, in 1980, they sold 1,200 of these and 9,800 SCs. If we go to 1984, they only sold 500 Alpines, as opposed to, even in France, 1,600 911s. So what an insult. The French are so patriotic, even then, they were buying 3 times as many 911s than this. And what I'm really interested in looking at today is why that's the case. Is it because of the quality of the car? Is it because of the way it drives? Is it because of the looks? Or is it something else? We're going to take a quick look around now because, although superficially they are quite similar, when you look under the skin, there are quite a few differences. The first big difference between the two is that the 911 was steel-bodied and had a monocoque chassis. This is actually glass fibre with a steel backbone. Now I have to say, steel spine, backbone chassis, I'm not the biggest fan of, because when I had my own Turbo Esprit, I found that you could feel the car flexing. I think it's quite hard to make them truly stiff. The other big thing to be aware of, obviously the fact that this is glass fibre does give it an advantage. We'll talk about the weight later. This, the Alpine, has double wishbone suspension all round, so it's really as good as you can get. The 911 was much more prehistoric. Torsion bar suspension, McPherson struts at the front and a trailing arm at the rear. In those ways, definitely the 911 is starting to look a little bit outclassed by the Alpine. The engine, of course, is another area where there is quite a significant difference. They are both 6 cylinders, but this is the Peugeot, Renault, Volvo, PRV I think they're called, 2.7 litre liquid-cooled engine. It was never really designed for sports cars. The Porsche has a flat 6, 3 litre, the SC, air-cooled. Now this only puts out 150 horsepower. The SC motor puts out about 200 horsepower depending on where you got it and the trim. One thing to mention, which I do find particularly bizarre about this, is that the battery is in the back. The Germans did at least have the good sense on a rear-engined car to put the battery at the front, but as we'll see in a moment, Alpine didn't. So I think now we can see why the battery hasn't been relocated to the front, and that is that there is no room. I was expecting to have quite a big boot up here, but it's definitely much smaller than that which is in a 911, and it's quite shallow too. I think the reason for that is that steel spine chassis, which, unlike a monocoque, which tends to be sort of, you know, shallower and rounder, would come up quite thickly here with the spars coming through to hold the suspension. Also, the fuel tank is under here, but again, on the 911s they managed to do that. The fuel tank is further back, and with the fuel tank where it is, which is directly under here, there probably wouldn't be room for a battery in this location. Technically then, in some ways, the Alpine is actually ahead of the SC. So why wasn't it as successful as the 911? Perhaps it's the way it drives. Let's take it out and see. First thing to strike you when you get into this car, if you are my height, is that it is a little bit cramped. So Better than I thought, because I saw a video where Hubnut was in this very car, and he is definitely shorter than me, and he was complaining it's quite hard. The seat goes back quite far, and my head is sort of skimming the roof there. The driving position is also very offset, so the steering wheel is off to the right, but it is at least not too dished off to the side, and the pedals are really off to the side as well. Your right leg is absolutely sort of wedged against the center console, so I wouldn't say it's a natural driving position. So let's get the looks out of the way. I love it, I adore it. You wouldn't call it a balanced design though, would you? I mean, even at this stage, you could tell that the French really like their bums. The front end is quite delicate and subtle, and then there's this bulbous back end. I think the car looks menacing, especially from some angles, and it has so much character. Would the looks have been a bit of a problem for it? Perhaps. It's not as conventionally pretty, dainty, delicate as the 911, is it? It's very, very different, but I don't think it's very often that looks have made or broken a car in this way. I think this is distinctive enough, menacing enough, that the looks would kind of have worked. Having sat in it now, I would definitely say the driving position is a problem. The 911s also don't have a perfect driving position, but they're much roomier than this, and it's definitely not as offset as this, and it's just, that would have been one of the things, I think, going against the Alpine. And when it first came out, this car in '71, it was with a 4-cylinder engine from the previous Alpine. In that guise, it was really quite underpowered. It was a much heavier car, same engine, same power. So in '76, Renault Alpine responded and slotted in the 6-cylinder engine. As I said earlier, that engine isn't really designed for sports cars, and it's a bit telling in this application. When the V6 version of this came out, actually, while we're here, let's do our usual pull and we can see how the engine performs. Then I'll get back to the history. You know what? Not bad. I'd heard these were pretty slow. To be fair, this one has a Holley carb conversion. Can't remember what the original carb was, but it was not very effective at all. The Holley carb really wakes them up, and it's not quick at all by modern standards. There's a slight hesitation when you first push on the throttle, and then it sort of surges a little bit, but I wouldn't complain too much about that power. It's not too bad. Right, let's get back quickly to the history. So the first version, 4-cylinder, underpowered. Then it got this V6. Also in this guise, so this car with these wheels, this Series 2, had the suspension taken from the mid-engined GT Turbo. So that's another notable improvement. Now, is it perhaps the curse of the PRV engine that did in the Alpines? This is the same engine, don't forget, that was also in the DeLorean, which was a spectacular failure and bankruptcy. Could that have dragged it down? Well, as we've seen, I think that the engine is adequate. Okay, this one is a bit upgraded with that Holley carb, probably has a little bit more power, maybe another 10 horsepower, 20 horsepower. Renault really should have done that. They could have got more than 150 horsepower from this engine. I don't know why they released it as it was. But again, on its own, I don't think that's enough. The other thing which is quite interesting is this is a full 250 kilos lighter than the SC. The SC, I think, tipped the scales at about 1,250, and this is 980 kilos. So that's one of the advantages of that bodywork. Driving it now, I can't feel as much flex as I could in my Esprit. So in that way, the chassis doesn't seem quite as compromised, the backbone chassis. But also that is because, typical of a French car, the suspension is absolutely fantastic. This is really starting to feel like a car that handles. This is a really bumpy part of the road. and it's not in the tiniest bit unsettled. And the steering is very, it's very, very nice. I knew it would be light. I knew it would be quite similar to a 911, but if anything, from an SC that I've driven before, I think it feels even better. It's got a bit more precision than a 911 setup, but lightness as well. So, and it's just as communicative. You can feel everything that's going on in the road ahead of you. I have to be honest here, it's a car that, and this sometimes happens to me on my tests, but it's a car that I'm liking. I always wanted to do a test on one of these. I've always liked them, but I didn't think it would be all that good to drive, and I think I've been surprised. Let's do another little pull. Revs up to 6.5, and again, I think Hubnut in his video said, don't bother taking it past 5, there's no point. Well, maybe it's been tuned since then, but it doesn't mind being revved in this, guys. 6.5, it keeps pulling. To me, most of the power is between 5 and 6. It's got a little bit of torque low down, it's quite tractable. The action of the gearbox is nice. God, it's really nice in these corners, these tight little S's. Wow. Oh, this is going to be, a bit of a love affair. Sorry, Chris. Put 5th gear in slightly too quickly, I think. Tiny little touch. So, what was I saying about the gearbox? Yes, the action of the gearbox is nice. It is a bit difficult sometimes to find gears, but I'm sure that if you spend time with the car, that's something you just get used to. It feels light, it feels nimble. You're always aware it pivots around the back end of the car. You definitely wouldn't say that it felt like a neutral handling car. But the front end is really pointy, it's delicate. There's just so much information coming through that it feels great. It really does. Reportedly, these are a lot better at the limit than an SC. They're more controllable, they don't have the sort of same level of lift-off oversteer. I'm not surprised about that, because with double wishbones all round, the geometry of the tyres is going to be much more in touch with the road in a consistent manner than the suspension on the 911. The one thing I think where the 911 does have a bit of a trump card over this is high-speed stability. I don't know if that's to do with aerodynamics, maybe the fact that it's heavier. This isn't as stable when you're going quick, but oh my. I'm sorry 911 guys, I love 911s, I really do, and I love SCs, which are quite maligned. I'm not doing in the SC, but this is a more fun drive. It does feel a little bit slower, but it is more fun to drive. Let's talk a little bit about the interior as well. I've already said the driving position, not acceptable as it is, and I don't know, it's not great. Pedal box is cramped, really sort of offset to the side. And the interior, although it's likable, it's amiable, but you can kind of feel the kit car origins of the way it's assembled. The car doesn't creak, it doesn't rattle, so it's absolutely not unpleasant. For someone of a smaller stature, it'd probably make quite a good GT because it's so comfortable, can't hear the engine very much. And ergonomically, everything, most stuff is in the right place, the controls aren't too confusing. 911 interior though, is definitely miles ahead in terms of real quality and perceived quality. The other thing about the PRV is the downside of the refinement is that it really doesn't sound very exciting. It's not only is it a little bit down on power to what it should be, but it's not very characterful. The 911 lump, you wouldn't mistake that for anything else. This is a bit, maybe with a different exhaust, it would bring out the innate character of the engine. But I absolutely love the Alpine. Then again, that is not necessarily a blessing for it, because I have a history of loving cars that weren't necessarily very successful. I love cars that are different, that have big personalities, as a classic, I think that this is absolutely hugely overlooked. It's brilliant to drive. It looks incredible. And honestly, I absolutely love it. I really love this car. It's one of those. I mean, I only ever test cars I'm interested in, so it's very rare, if ever. I think that's just come off. It's very rare. It hasn't come off. It's just come down from the clip. Yeah, it's very rare, if it ever happens, that I don't like a car that I'm reviewing. Generally, I'll only review them if I want to and I'm interested. But there are some that really wake up my emotions, and that Pantera GT5 was one of them, and this is another. It's just great. It really is. Why then did the 911 sell so much better? I think it's a whole mixture of things. Although this is incredible, it's just not as complete as a 911. So I can understand why, yeah, I think it drives better, frankly. It handles better than a 911, and it's more fun to drive. But as an overall owning experience, the 911, the SC is definitely, I can see why people would have bought it rather than this. There is also the snob factor, and that is definitely a big thing. You know, this is okay an Alpine, but really people knew it's got a Renault badge, it's a Renault. Thank you all so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. If you have a car that you want me to review, that you're interested in me doing a video on, please get in touch. Instagram is the best way. There's also my email address on YouTube. And I'm looking for, it's sort of 70s, 80s, 90s stuff, Italian cars, French cars, anything unusual. Thank you all so much. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and see you for the next video.